Thank you. My name is Andrea Weiner, and I'm the Clinical Director of Matrix Institute on Addictions in Los Angeles, California. I'm here today to talk a little bit about stages of recovery and things you want to look out for as you're going through your own treatment. A lot of times when people are trying to get sober, they put a lot of blame on themselves because they feel like they should be feeling better sooner than they actually are. What you're going to find today, hopefully, in these stages of recovery is some kind of roadmap to follow so that when you're feeling a certain way, you'll start understanding that it's not just about the fact that you're someone in recovery who's trying to get better, but there's different things that are going on chemically in the brain that is challenging your ability mentally and physically to feel better. So hopefully you'll be able to get something out of this and you'll be able to apply it to your own recovery. What is a stage of recovery? Well, we're going to talk about 4 stages today. Hopefully, by the time you leave here, you'll be able to take this information and to give it to other people as well to help them. When we look at recovery in general, we always understand this concept of withdrawal. Now, what we understand about withdrawal has a lot to do with what goes on physically within us, how you're not feeling so good when you are chemically withdrawing from a drug, be it pot or cocaine or methamphetamine or heroin or alcohol. You're all going to go through some type of withdrawal to get off your drug. What people don't understand, though, there's also a chemical depletion in the brain that happens when you're trying to get through your withdrawal. And even though you're physically uncomfortable, there are changes in the brain that also come up for you that we want you to pay attention to. So that's one component of the stages that happens in withdrawal. We have another stage called honeymoon. And if you think about what a honeymoon is, it's pretty exciting and you feel good and it's romantic. Well, your recovery isn't necessarily romantic, but you do feel better as your recovery progresses. And we're going to talk about the honeymoon period because that essentially means that the chemicals in your brain are trying to produce more serotonin, more dopamine in order for you to feel better. And when you have those chemicals swimming around in your brain, you seem to do better during that stage of recovery. So we'll touch on that as well. The wall, or protracted abstinence, is going to be the hardest time in the recovery. When we're looking at a recovery period in regards to the stages, we're really right now talking about a 4 to 6 month period, maybe out to a year. And during at least the first 4 to 6 months, the wall is going to be the most challenging period in your recovery. And not to worry you, we will give you some ideas and tools so you will learn how to use these tools when you hit the wall. Adjustment and resolution, pretty much the same, with the difference of time being the only difference. Once you get clean and sober, learning how to adjust to life on life's terms is really important. And that is happening while, again, the chemicals are evening out in your brain. And with resolution, it's just the ongoing living life for the long term as a sober person. All right, so we're going to talk about what these stages look like and the time elements, things to pay attention to as you're going through these stages of recovery. Now, everybody is wired differently, and everybody uses drugs and the amount of drugs differently. So these timelines that I'm giving you are just something to pay attention to, a benchmark. Obviously, everybody's different, and you're going to fall through different time frames within these categories. Essentially, when we talk about withdrawal, we're looking to 0 to 2 weeks. And within that time frame, 0 to 2 weeks, what you're going to find happening is, obviously, you're not physically feeling well. But there's an interesting phenomenon that happens within the brain. Your body adjusts to the fact that you're using drugs. And when it does that, the dopamine and the serotonin that gets released in the brain is still happening, so it allows you to use drugs and still get on with your life. But an interesting thing happens when you take the drugs out of the equation. The brain isn't quite used to the fact that the drugs aren't there. So the amount of serotonin and the amount of dopamine that gets manufactured in the brain is at a deficit. So when you're looking at withdrawal, if this is about an even place to be chemically, when someone is in withdrawal, they're chemically depleted. There's not enough dopamine and there's not enough serotonin and norepinephrine to help you feel better. Now, if you think about it, if you don't have enough of those feel-good chemicals to get you over the hump, it's going to be awfully difficult to walk around feeling any kind of consistent emotion because these chemicals help regulate our emotion. So we're looking at the time period of withdrawal to be anywhere from 0 to 14 days and the different extremes that happen emotionally as you're going through that. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the honeymoon period. And the honeymoon period is probably a more positive time as you're going through the first 4 to 6 months of your recovery. What you're going to find in the honeymoon period is you're going to have a lot more energy, perhaps, and be a little more focused. That has to do with an increase of the chemicals that are happening in your brain. Now, as I mentioned before, in withdrawal, you're chemically depleted. Well, what happens in honeymoon is all the chemicals that are down here start increasing in the brain. It's as if your brain is getting a wake-up call, and it says, make the chemicals now. There's no more drugs coming in. So now you'll have an excess of dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine and all these chemicals that make you feel good. And as we talk about the different stages, you're going to find yourself a little more positive as you're going through recovery. You're going to try to get more things done because you're feeling better. But there's also going to be some negative consequences to that as well. Just like when you were in withdrawal, there were a lot of positive things happening because you were detoxing, but you didn't feel so good because there were some negative things happening. Now again, that time frame for the honeymoon period is 2 weeks to 6 weeks. So that's enough time to start feeling good and start applying the tools that you're going to learn in your recovery. However, that feel-good feeling is not going to last forever, because what's going to start happening is you're going to hit a stage called the wall. And the wall stage is essentially your body trying to regulate itself now chemically. The brain has exceeded expectations in producing all those chemicals we talked about. And eventually now the chemicals are going to have to start coming down. And as the chemicals start coming down, you have this odd phenomenon happen as your brain is trying to regulate itself and finding the new normal. There are going to be some days you feel great, and other days where you think, what is the point of getting sober? I feel as bad as I do today as I did when I started. And the other side of the wall that is so psychologically confusing is if you're doing all the right things, you're showing up to your meetings, you're calling people, you're using your tools, it would make sense that things should be going in a positive direction. But when you're chemically being compromised on certain days, you don't have the control or the wherewithal to change that. What you will have control over are the tools you're going to use and the skill base that you have in your recovery to get you through the emotional upheaval that tends to happen in the wall. The wall period goes from 6 weeks to 120 days. That's a lot of time, and you're not going to know when you hit the wall. Everybody hits it at a different time. We do know that exercise is a huge help for people in the wall because it releases endorphins and it raises up the chemicals so you feel better and you're more stable. What we're also looking at after we go through the wall is an adjustment time where chemically things will start evening out. So you'll see in the adjustment phase 120 days plus your ability to deal with emotions better. You're feeling a little more constant in how you're going to do emotionally, and then be able to deal with what we call some of the underlying psychopathology that comes up. And that leads you to just a resolution phase of living your life as a sober person and dealing with all the different things that are going to come at you day to day. This is, again, just a reminder, the withdrawal, 0 to 15 days. Everybody's going to fall in that category with withdrawal and how they're doing based on how much they used, their body type, their body weight. Now, when we look at people who are going through withdrawal, we pay attention to 4 different things. And in fact, we're going to track these 4 different components as we're going through these stages of recovery. There are things that happen behaviorally to people as they're going through stages, what they're doing action-wise and what needs to change. We look at what people are going through cognitively, perhaps their confusion, their priority of thinking, not being as focused as much. We look at things going on emotionally. Especially during withdrawal, people are not at their peak. Remember, I talked about if you don't have the chemicals helping you out, if you're at a chemical depletion, then you're not going to have a lot of the positive emotions helping you out. And emotions that you do have are going to be on the extreme. So we see more of the negative emotions going on during withdrawal. We see depression, we see anxiety, we see sadness, we see loneliness. These are all normal things to expect during a withdrawal phase. And for those of you who are family members here, obviously you're going to be going through some phases as well during this withdrawal phase. You may not trust as well. You may be fearful about what's happening to your loved one and how they're going to deal with things. You may also be really supportive. This may be the first time you're here going through recovery with the person that you love, and therefore you may really be rooting for them and helping them and don't have a lot of anger. Those of you who are friends of your recovering person, you may be also supportive and scared or not know how to react. These are all really normal things to be experiencing during the withdrawal phase. Now, some of the things we want to pay attention to during withdrawal are what happens that could be a setup to going out and using within the first 2 weeks. We talked a little bit about your body physically detoxing, but I want to pay attention to some of the other components. Craving happens a lot when you're going through recovery in the first 14 days. You do not have a whole lot of skills to handle the fact that you're craving. And because this may be something that is very foreign to you and very scary, it may be more comfortable if you could use as you're going through withdrawal. So that's a normal reaction. And for family members, I just want to tell you not to be afraid of that. It's all right if they're going through cravings. They've just stopped using. Depression and low energy and irritability during the withdrawal phase is very normal. Remember, I said that the chemicals are at a deficit when you're in withdrawal, and that means that you don't have enough of the dopamine and serotonin to help you raise the chemicals up and feel better. Naturally, you don't have those chemicals, so these are normal features to expect. If you're a family member and you're wondering, why are they sleeping all the time? Why won't they get out of bed? That's a pretty normal phenomenon for someone who's been using for a long time to be sleeping. For some people, especially stimulant users, they haven't slept in a long time perhaps, or their sleeping pattern is off. Maybe they've used medication to help them sleep and now they're not taking it. So being exhausted, trying to sleep and exhausted during the day, that's normal. Also, disordered thinking and memory problems, it's really not unusual to keep forgetting where you put your keys and why you walked into a certain room in the house. You know, this is hard. Recovery is hard. You're not as focused. You're not paying attention. It's more how I feel today. So this disordered thinking that you have, that will pass. It gets better. Now, let's pay attention to some of the factors that happen within relapse. Unstructured time. When you're first going through withdrawal and you set yourself up and you don't know exactly what to expect, you may not know that staying structured and scheduled will get you through it. And we see a lot of people relapse because there is no structure yet in their early recovery. And because of that, they may also find themselves putting them in situations where all their primary triggers are around. For instance, if you're a family member and you're not in recovery and you have alcohol in the house and they're at home and they're trying to go through withdrawal and they open the refrigerator and there's a big thing of champagne in there, well, you know, their brain's going to start going and they're going to go, well, maybe the champagne will make me feel better. perhaps. So you want to pay attention as a family member to what their triggers might be. Ask them. They may not know early in recovery, but if they do, as a family member, you may be able to aid that process. Those people who are in treatment for things besides alcohol and marijuana, like pills, like heroin, like methamphetamine, like cocaine, may use a secondary drug of choice to enable them to feel better during withdrawal. Marijuana maintenance, you might have heard that phrase before. Because marijuana is not so bad, the person may be saying, well, I can do a little pot, and that'll kind of get me over the hump. What we do know that happens is anytime you put a substance in your system, you're going to find out that it sets the brain back in the healing. So even though you think pot's not such a big deal, and it's an herb, what we know for a fact is that as the brain's trying to heal, it doesn't help. There are going to be paranoia issues that come up for some people, especially if you're using stimulants. We see people wonder if someone's looking behind them or what's going on, even though they haven't used their drugs for a few weeks. If you're a family member, that's normal. You probably don't have a paranoid schizophrenic on your hands. However, if it continues throughout a treatment episode, of course, we're going to pay attention to that. But we don't get so alarmed early in the withdrawal phase. And I think I mentioned before, depression, some of the negative emotions, as well as not being able to sleep, are huge relapse factors that set you up during withdrawal. All right, we're going to move on now to the honeymoon phase, which I talked about being anywhere from 15 to 45 days. That's a lot of good time to get some good recovery in and to really work a smart program. There are going to be things you want to pay attention to as you're going through the honeymoon phase. Behaviorally, this is what's going to happen. You're going to feel better. You're going to have a little more energy than you did during withdrawal. You're going to find yourself wanting to do a lot of things, and you're going to find yourself wanting to solve all of life's problems now that you're feeling better. Maybe make up for lost time. So therefore, you might be a little unfocused, and you may not be prioritizing as well as you need to be. We find that cognitively, without being able to prioritize, what you find yourself doing is putting yourself into very triggering situations, trying to do too much too soon, which sets up some kind of feeling of inadequacy or anxiety and could therefore be a setup for a relapse. Emotionally, because you may be feeling overconfident now, or at least better, many people get complacent. People think, well, I'm feeling so much better now. Thank you for coming. I need to go. I don't need your help anymore, but you've been great, and if I need you, I'll come get you. The idea being that when people hit a honeymoon phase, they feel so much better about themselves. Sometimes they think, well, maybe I don't have a drug problem at all. Maybe I just needed to stop for a few days to see if I could do it. Now, relationship-wise, for the family members, you may start getting excited to see them feeling better. And if at least they're not walking around hugging trees, they definitely have an aura about them that they're going to start feeling better. But because of that, you may get lost into thinking, well, maybe they're better. Maybe I made too big of a deal about this. And maybe they're not really an addict and they were right. They just needed some time. It's understandable that there'd be a quality of denial around what is actually going on with your loved one. It's not unusual to hope and to pray that maybe it's not as serious as it was. But addiction is real, and there's lots of different stages that we have to pay attention to. And although the honeymoon is positive, it's no cure for what's in front of them. All right, so features that we want to pay attention to. I talked a little bit about being overconfident. It depends on your drug of choice, really. We find that with stimulant addicts, they're really feeling better. They really want to get up and go. Maybe with alcoholics, we find that their affect is better. They're not running around singing, but they actually feel better, not as depressed, not as low. The memory problems, depending on who you are, can continue. We want to tell you as a family member as well not to worry about that. That eventually resumes and takes care of itself. But these different intense feelings during the honeymoon, the mood swings, the ups, the downs, the highs or lows, those are temporary, and not to get too concerned about it. Again, these features are just things to pay attention to during these stages. It helps you not feel so negative about yourself and judge yourself as much as you're trying to get better. I talked a little bit earlier about the secondary drug use. When people are feeling better, they start getting a little sloppy. Well, I don't really have an alcohol problem. I'm here for cocaine. Maybe I can drink now and things will be okay. It makes sense that you're going to ask that question, but the truth is we're trying to help the brain heal. And that's not going to serve its purpose by doing that. Now, can people relapse during a honeymoon phase? Well, absolutely. Because you're feeling better, therefore maybe you feel cured. Maybe you feel like this was just a blip on the radar screen and you're actually okay. So that overconfidence that I talked about before as a feature can actually become a reason to relapse. You get a little too complacent, a little too excited about the fact that you're maintaining, and you may put yourself in a difficult or awkward situation. Structure, which is so important, which we will get to, people will get a little lazy when they're feeling better in their recovery. And you'd think now that people are feeling better, they're working extra hard. But it's not unusual to get sloppy in your recovery. Resistance to behavior change really has a lot more to do with, well, you know, how much longer do I have to keep going to those meetings? Or, you know, I'm feeling so much better now. Do I really have to pick up the phone and call the treatment center and check in if I'm triggered? The idea is that you want to make your recovery as easy on yourself as possible. And when you have suggestions that help you change your behavior, that will actually help you in recovery, the idea is to try them out and see if they work. And if they work, you want to use them in your recovery. So being resistant to behavior change could actually set you backwards in your recovery and put you in a sort of prelapse mode where you're doing everything that you're supposed to do, but not quite enough. And you're setting yourself up for a relapse. Inability to prioritize, you see that as a theme that's coming up in these slides. It's not unusual now that you're trying to get structured and to get focused to start prioritizing too much, to start doing too many things at one time and almost overscheduling yourself to the point where now you feel like you can't handle it again. All right, the wall stage. The wall stage is probably the scariest part of recovery within those 4 to 6 months. And what we want to tell our clients essentially is that it may be scary and you may be uncomfortable, but it actually means your brain is healing. Because again, what's happening is that deficit that was in your brain. Here, let me see if I can show you with my hands again. We were here normally, and here you had the deficit and withdrawal, and then up here you had this overabundance of chemicals, and now remember, the brain is trying to find its new point. It's like a pendulum. Where does it stop? Where's my center? And as it's trying to do that, there are going to be days chemically where you're not going to feel 100%. You're going to feel like you're moving backwards. So we find that the wall is one of the most challenging stages that clients go through in recovery. Behaviorally, they're going to find it hard to move. They're going to feel a little more sluggish than they were in the honeymoon. They're going to find like their energy is gone. Where they were feeling full of energy in the honeymoon, now they wonder where the energy went. Cognitively, there are going to be thoughts in their brain. Well, maybe I can use just a little bit. These relapse justifications will start creeping up, where they actually consider putting themselves in situations just to see if they can test themselves, if they can get through it. Emotionally, it feels like a roller coaster, because you were feeling so much better when you were in the honeymoon, it doesn't make sense now psychologically. Why do I feel bad again? I was feeling so good. This doesn't make sense. You're going to find that it challenges your recovery. Anhedonia, this lack of drive or joy, none whatsoever for some. There's an extreme feeling from how you were feeling during the honeymoon. And for those family members and for you clients, the relationships, they get tested. People get more irritable. Family members get triggered. They watch your behavior in the wall and they think you're going to relapse again because you tend to go back to some of the old familiar behavior. Not necessarily going to use, but for the family member it appears like you may use. And that sets up problems within the relationships, problems with employers, and even your ability to trust yourself right now as you're going through the wall stage. Now, this protracted abstinence, this stage kind of feels like it's lasting forever and it's not getting any better. This return to old behaviors is a real feature you want to pay attention to. If you're not feeling 100%, and things aren't going the way you were hoping to, it makes a lot of sense that you put yourselves in situations that feel more familiar. Well, a lot of times those familiar feelings that you want to get to and places that you want to go to are very dangerous for your recovery. So you need to be careful during this time that you're working a harder program, that you're actually going over and beyond what you might have been doing before. Because in the wall, chances of relapsing are higher because you're not at 100% yet. There's unclear thinking, there's isolating again, where you might have been with people, maybe now you're disappearing, staying in your house, not picking up the phone. These are things that can set you up for relapse if you're not careful. The family problems can range from anything from family members just worrying too much to the clients, you guys, not communicating anymore, not sharing the things that you might have been sharing when you were in withdrawal or when you were feeling good in the honeymoon. And because of that, the family members wondering, uh-oh, does this mean they're going to go use again? They get worried as well. Craving will return depending on where you're at emotionally. Some irritability, anger, people get bored a lot during this stage, so you want to be extra careful. These things will set you up for relapse, and it's very important to work a very strong program now. I talked about isolating a second ago. When you're not feeling your optimum in recovery, it's often very normal for people to separate, to disengage again. Either they're trying to figure things out, they don't want to be bothered, it's not going to serve your recovery. You're going to feel more emotions now when you're in the wall. It feels emotional. It doesn't make sense. I'm thrilled when you guys are miserable during the wall. It means your brain is healing. That's a good thing. And as I said earlier during the honeymoon, all this emotionality that you may feel is temporary. You're going to get over the hump. Remember, the wall lasts anywhere from 6 weeks to 120 days. It doesn't mean you're going to be in it all the time. You will get a respite from feeling some of these feelings I'm talking about. But because relapse is higher during this time, you really want to work a stronger program. The idea that you've been in recovery now for 6 weeks to 120 days and you still may be sleeping, you still may not be sleeping. We talk about insomnia, low energy, fatigue. That gets very frustrating, and that's a huge setup. People need to sleep, and if they're not sleeping, sometimes they think, well, maybe I can take a pill, maybe I can have a drink, maybe I can smoke a joint. Again, if you're working a stronger program in the wall, you will have support systems to get through it. The behavioral drift is probably the thing you want to pay closest attention to when you've hit the wall. If there are certain things that work in your recovery that you know that you're doing every day, such as going to a meeting, picking up the phone, talking to your sponsor, exercising, writing in a journal, and you find yourself not doing any of these things, chances are you're in a relapse drift. And when you start drifting towards relapse, you guys know what happens. Before you know it, you're justifying why it's okay to use just a little, and you're making choices that you wouldn't normally make, partly because you're not feeling so well chemically, because you're in the wall. This resistance to exercise, I just want to touch on a minute. When you're in recovery and you're in that honeymoon period and you're feeling good, that's an excellent time to start exercising. Doesn't mean you have to join a gym. It doesn't mean you have to run a mile. It just means you have to move. And if you're moving and you're exercising and the endorphins are being released, as I mentioned before, you're going to give yourself a respite when you're in this wall and you feel like you don't have enough wherewithal chemically to do what you need to do. So one of the things we talk about is if you've been exercising on a regular basis and we see that that stops, again, chances are you may be setting yourself up to relapse. Paranoia may still be present, by the way, for those of you who deal or suffer from that. You'll probably find it's not as loud and you're not as nervous all the time, but there may be mild types of paranoia, and that, again, is a setup. I want that to go away. I'm sick of feeling this way. I'm sick of wondering if somebody's watching me all the time. Okay, I just want to give you a quick, a few examples of what some of the clients, one client in particular, talked about the wall being for her. She said a lack of energy was almost constant, even if I slept for hours. Lack of memory, inability to concentrate, and a gray film over my vision clouded my world. My sleep became mixed up. I'd be dead tired during the day and experience insomnia at night. All the things I just talked about, this was her experience. It felt very different for her than when she was in the honeymoon. She goes on to say that throughout the wall, I didn't care about anything or anybody, including myself. Nothing seemed important. Nothing felt good. Boredom and hopelessness were constant companions. I felt the whole thing would never end. Now, you listen to that and you think, well, why would anybody try to stay sober? That sounds like a miserable way to live. But the idea is that, again, when we talk about the wall, all of what she talked about, temporary. It's going to pass. Remember, chemically you're at a deficit, brain's trying to even out chemically. It's going to pass. All right, adjustment phase. Things are going to start feeling more positive again. Between 120 to 180 days approximately, what we start paying attention to are all the more behavioral changes, emotional changes, things that you can pretty much expect to be more stable now, day in and day out as you're living your life. One of the things I just want to say that's really important is when you're trying to get sober at the beginning, that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to get sober. You're not necessarily living a clean and sober life yet. When you get to this adjustment phase, the assimilation starts occurring where now you are living a clean and sober life. It's not something you're trying to do, it's something you're actually doing. And because of that, you're just trying to feel your way through things now the best you can. Behaviorally, you may not know what your limits are. Your choices, you may be a little unsure. You know, it takes a good year to experience all the different things you're going to experience in recovery. Christmas and New Year and weddings and bar mitzvahs and parties and big events. And so you're not always going to maneuver 100% behaviorally in all situations all the time. Cognitively, you may have thoughts about using that may scare you. You may wonder, God, why did I get into this? This is really hard work. You mean I have to be sober for the rest of my life? It's pretty normal. And if you're a family member and they say these things and they question themselves, instead of freaking out and thinking, oh my God, they're going to relapse, I just know it, just ask, well, what does that mean for you? That must be scary for you. I never thought about that from your point of view before. Emotionally, the hope is that you're more constant. And the emotions that are going to come up for you now are more of what we call your red flag feelings. Maybe the emotions that you were always struggling with prior to your addiction that are now there and really rearing their ugly head. So it's going to force you to have to learn how to cope with emotions differently. And now with relationships, maybe as a family member, you feel more confident that they're getting better. Therefore, you may feel a little more courageous to bring up the things you didn't want to bring up earlier. You may say things, so there may be changes in communicating. If you're a client, you may hear things from your family member you didn't expect to hear this far into your recovery. Now, some features you want to pay attention to. I'm going to pass on the relationship problems because we've pretty much been talking about that throughout. But boredom is something that is huge for people as they're trying to get sober. If you're still not structured, if you still don't have a lot going on for yourself and you've created a strong program, the boredom is going to set in. That could be really dangerous during this adjustment phase. You want to pay attention to that. Having no goals yet is also going to put you in a compromising situation, not knowing who you are or what to expect from your long-term recovery. And it's not unusual, now that you are stable and your recovery is at a place that you understand, that some guilt and some shame is going to start rearing its head. You want to be careful not to guilt yourself into relapse, not to shame yourself into relapse. This is a slow process. And every day you're learning and you're finding out new things about yourself and your addiction and your recovery that should serve you in the long run. It's not unusual for people to wake up and go, I hate my job. I hate my life. How did I get here? You start asking these questions now in the adjustment phase that you probably needn't have asked yourself during withdrawal. You want to look at if you're happy. Am I happy in my marriage? Am I happy in my job? And this idea of underlying psychopathology, what does that mean? Well, it's not unusual when you're trying to get clean and sober for certain emotions to start showing that weren't there when you were using, because the drugs were masking them. You may be someone who suffered from anxiety when you were growing up, and down the line you started drinking, and you find the drinking helped the anxiety, and after a while the drinking caused so much depression in your life that you totally forgot that you were an anxious person. But now that the alcohol's out of the equation, now the anxiety starts coming up and you don't know what to do with it. That would be an example of underlying psychopathology starting to surface. And those are the things we want to pay attention to in order to help you get through it. Therapists are also very helpful in facilitating ways to deal with some of that underlying psychopathology. People can relapse during this phase. You're stabilizing, you're feeling better, but relapse is not unheard of at all. This is, again, we keep seeing that theme of secondary drug use coming up. It's not unusual for people to try to test themselves again with marijuana, with alcohol, with pills. People get lazy in their structure. Well, maybe I am better now. Maybe I don't have to go to so many meetings as I was going to before. And the struggle over, am I an addict? Am I not an addict? Was this just a phase in my life? Did I grow out of it? That's really common. We also see this 6-month syndrome or a year syndrome come up, where people are working so hard at getting 6 months sober or getting a year sober. That means so much to them that they forget what's going to happen the next day after they hit their year. All their defenses down, not knowing where to go. Okay, I hit my year, now what do I do in recovery? These are things we want to pay attention to, and along with you, give you opportunities on ways to deal with them so you don't put yourself in relapse situations. Resolution at 180 days plus. Resolution is just, okay, here I am, I've done it, I've worked my program, I'm out of recovery, and maybe I don't have as much structure as I had before. So maybe behaviorally, you're putting yourself in pre-addiction destructive behavior, really forgetting some of the things early on in recovery that were really important to know, that I need to stay away from that person, or I shouldn't go to this place. Cognitively, this still, for some people, not everybody, but it's not unusual to still wonder how bad was my problem. God, 4 or 5 months ago, that was a long time ago. How am I going to be able to deal with this recovery forever? Well, there's a term in AA, one day at a time. That will really help you sometimes. Instead of thinking forever, instead of future tripping, which some clients have talked about, one day at a time will get you out of that thinking. Emotionally, you're going to be more stable, but there will be times when you don't quite know what to expect emotionally. And not being able to control emotions at times will scare you, especially when you felt like you had some semblance of control of them when you were using. Many of you would self-medicate. Well, you're not doing that anymore, and dealing with emotions on life's terms will become challenging. An emergence of dysfunctional patterns. Well, for family members, your loved ones are here in recovery. Well, guess what? You've been in recovery too. You might not have been coming to treatment 3 and 4 days a week, but you've been doing your work. And you may have found things coming up for you, just like our clients found came up for them, that is actually forcing you to look at your life and the family system as a whole and what you need to do to change that. Now, briefly, I'm just going to talk about certain kinds of triggers that you want to pay attention to as you're going through these stages of recovery. There are internal triggers and external triggers. External triggers really have to do with people, places, things, times of day. So for instance, some triggers that are people-oriented. Well, drug-using friends, obviously, dealers that you hang out with. If you're a family member, your loved one may say to you, who's a client, they may say, but you know, John's been my friend for 20 years. I'm not going to get him out of my life just because he's my coke dealer. And they're going to have a pretty convincing argument for that. But you know what? It's not safe for them. They need to avoid people that are going to set them up for relapse, especially people like that who they're going to see on a regular basis. Voices, if you hear their voice on an answering machine, that could be very triggering for people. Maybe the absence of someone who's very supportive. It's important, if you're a family member, to keep that communication going with the client, because for some, they've really depended on you to be part of their security and support network. Also, you want to pay attention to spouses and partners when it comes to intimacy and sex. Many times, the person you used with was a trigger for you, and you're married to them or living with them. So you really want to be careful that you find different ways on dealing with your triggers in relation to your partner. That could be a big setup to relapse if it doesn't get dealt with. Places can also be triggers. Drug dealers' homes, bars and clubs, the neighborhoods you used to use in, a freeway exit, or a highway exit. You may be just going down the road and everything's fine, and then before you know it, your car mysteriously just takes you off the road. And you're somewhere and you don't know how you got there, but your brain just expects that it's time to use. And work sites, work environment, street corners, we can come up with a lot of different places that could be considered triggers. And lots of different things, paraphernalia, ATM machines, sexually explicit material. Certain movies are very triggering. You can go to a movie and there it is, big as life on the screen. The character's drinking or using drugs. That could be very triggering. If you're a family member, pay attention to what videos you rent and what movies you go to with your loved ones. Look at what they've rented. They could put themselves into a situation where they want to use just because they were sitting at home one night and they were going to watch a movie. Internally, there are going to be triggers that come up emotionally for you. These have to do with how you feel, not what you do. So anxiety, anger, frustration, we could come up with a whole myriad of emotions that could set somebody up for relapse. Using your tools and working your program will make you be able to deal with some of these emotions in a way that's reasonable and to help you get through it. The idea isn't to shift how you feel, but learn how to maintain in your recovery as you're feeling these feelings. Now, I just want to stress, as you're going through the stages of your recovery, structure is very important. The idea of structure will keep you focused, will give you a game plan, and will create for you a roadmap on what you're going to do on any given day at any given time. It's something to use to keep in front of you when you feel like everything else around you is overwhelming and scary. So what we want to help you do early in recovery is to create this structure. Learn to deal with things one day at a time, one moment at a time sometimes. What the structure is going to allow you to do is give you an ongoing foundation for your recovery, something to expect, something that you know when you do this particular event or thing, chances are you're going to stay sober another day. Now, how do I create structure? I'm not a very organized person. I'm just, really creative, and I like to live on the moment. Well, there's a lot of different ways you can create structure. You can create a schedule for yourself where you're going to actually write down on a schedule what you're doing from 8 to 9 in the morning and 9 to 10 and then 10 to 4 in the afternoon if you go to work. The idea behind scheduling is to create a roadmap for yourself so that you understand what's coming up next. So that when surprises happen, you're not totally lost and, oh, how am I going to deal with that now? Treatment programs, a great way to deal with structure and to put yourself in a situation that's going to be safe. If you're a family member, Al-Anon is something that's wonderful. While your loved ones are going to AA or CA or MA, you can go to Al-Anon. You can also create structure for yourself during this recovery period. If you're religious, if you believe that going to temple or going to church is going to serve your recovery, then absolutely add that to the equation. And by the way, always find time to do things that are fun. A lot of times when you were using, you forgot all the things that you used to do, maybe when you were a kid, or things that used to bring you joy. Maybe you can go horseback ride again, or go jet skiing. Perhaps you can go hiking. Do things that you wouldn't normally do. Allow yourself to have some fun. And you want to create people in your life who are safe. So you're going to want to find people who are going to help you with your recovery and to support your recovery. You don't want negative influences in your recovery. Okay, now, scheduling can be hard and you're going to run into problems. Some of you may find that if your schedule's not perfect, you're not going to do it. No one said your schedule has to be perfect. This is just a guideline, a roadmap to help you through your day as you're living it. Be careful of putting too many demands on yourself. Remember, you're not going to write a schedule of going into the kitchen, cleaning the kitchen, going into the garage, cleaning the garage, picking up the kids, coming home, cleaning the living room. You have to put in your schedule what you're actually going to do, not all the things you've been meaning to do. And also make room in your schedule. It's important to have downtime. Put in there, gonna take a nap for an hour, or gonna watch my favorite TV show for an hour. It's perfectly normal to feel like you want to do everything and get it done, but that's not really reality. Negative expectations and what you expect to happen as you're scheduling, it will always throw you off because something new will always come into the equation. A friend came into town, the power went off, you have a flat tire. So it's okay if your schedule is going to change. You'll always have other ideas that you can use. Remember, you're working a program of recovery. When you're scheduling, there are going to be a lot of different tools. Talk to your support system. Talk to your sponsor. You don't have to come up with these things all by yourself. Now, it's not unusual as you're going through all these stages in your recovery to have justifications about using. A lot of people consider, wow, I wonder if I could use again and get away with it. Is anybody going to know about that? Here's a meaning of justification. It's the rational part of your brain. It attempts to provide a logical explanation for justifying behavior. And that justifying of behavior, it moves you closer to your drug of choice. You put yourself in the position now and wonder, I wonder if I can do this or not. Your relapse thoughts gain power when they're not openly recognized and discussed. If you're having a thought about using, talk to a family member, talk to a friend, let them know that you're thinking these things because justifications are very powerful. Now, if you're a family member and they tell you, God, I want to use and I don't know what to do, it wouldn't be unusual for you to get really nervous and think, What do I do? How do I help them? I don't know what to do. Well, there's a few things you can do. You can ask them what they mean. You can talk about it a little bit more. Maybe you can suggest to them to call their therapist or to call their sponsor or maybe call another group member. They don't have to go through it alone, and neither do you. You as a family member don't have to have all the answers just because they came to you with this thought. You don't have to solve it for them. They have a lot of recovery in place. You may just have to remind them of that along the way. Now, this is a balance wheel, a balanced lifestyle for recovery. I don't even know if I fit this wheel all the time, but I do the best I can. We all have stressors. We all have days that are harder than others. But the idea is to try to make sure in your recovery you allow time for sleep. You allow yourself times to do things that are fun, that are leisurely things, that help give you energy and get you through the next day. It's important to work on relationships to help redirect and redefine relationships. Maybe that means going on vacation together, going to a therapist together, doing group work together. The idea is to have a balanced recovery with a little bit of everything and as much as you can do every day. You don't want to have all of one and nothing of another. If you can do this, and if you can work your recovery in a way that's balanced, you have a roadmap for success, and the goal then would be living a clean and sober life the best that you can every day. I want to thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure meeting you and working with you. I hope to see you again soon. Enjoy your evening. Thank you.